Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark Stay.
And I'm Mark Devone. We'd like to say a very special thank you to the sponsor of this episode, Plotter.
Oh, yes.
Plotter.com. And Mark, we've been playing with Plotter, haven't we? And one of the things that I really like about this software is it brings everything into one place. I don't know about you, but I used to suffer from having, when I'd be working on ideas, I'd have a notes on my phone, so I'd bung stuff down there. If I was in the dentist waiting room, I'd be looking for scraps of paper when I suddenly got that idea, and then I'd open up my journal when I got home and stick a few things in there, and it was an absolute nightmare trying to pull everything together in one place, and you'd always miss stuff. You'd always miss stuff. And what I love about Plotter is it has this feature called Automate Your Outlines, and it lets you basically take your entire story and it just shows it to you at a glance. And
not just one story, not just one. You can do whole series with this as well. So if you are writing a series and you want to keep track of what's been happening over the whole series, it does that for you as well. And this is, we were talking about this on the Academy. We had a coaching session on Monday, and we're talking about outlines and how they can be really, really useful. I find them more useful actually when you're editing. Then you can step back from your first draft and look at it and go, okay, what's working, what's not. And this Plotter is one of those things, you know, it again, so visual, allows you just to step back and look at the shape of your story and see where it might be a bit wonky and where it might need a little bit of fixing. And it's really, really handy for that.
It's brilliant, because the other thing is you can get, it's a bit like, the way I think of it, it's a bit like when you're kind of hacking through a forest, and then a helicopter lands, pulls you up, and you can just go right above the entire, and you can just get a bird's eye view of things. And what's also really nice is it actually exports all of these outlines to Microsoft Word and Scrivener. So if you're using those particular tools to write your main manuscript in, then you can just pop it straight in and you're good to go. Absolutely brilliant. So if you're interested in having a play with Plotter, pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com/Plotter, and Plotter is Plotter. Plotter. And thank you again for them for sponsoring this episode.
There'll be a link in the show notes so you can have a play around with that as well. And there's a whole free trial thing too. So do you often find yourself hacking through a jungle and then being lifted into the air by a helicopter, Mr. Diaz?
Only in my wildest imaginations, Mark. I did once. Okay, true story. I did once go, when I was backpacking, you do these crazy things when you're younger. I think I was about 21, and I went to Thailand. And I thought it'd be fun to head north to a place called Chiang Mai. Now, anyone who hears that word Chiang Mai, they would go, oh my gosh, he didn't, did he? I went on a 3-day excursion, they called it in the tourist brochure. What it was, day one was actually hacking through a rainforest. And I kid you not, but the guy that led the expedition, there were 2 people from Japan, 2 Germans, and me and an English guy. And our guy that led us through the forest was called Rambo.
No way.
Yeah, I'm not kidding you. He was built like Rambo, and I felt very, very happy to have him on our side when, on the second night, we were staying in some tribal village, which was an experience in itself, and he was parked outside our hut door guarding us because there was gunfire. There was a gunfight going on somewhere, because we were right on the border, I think, of Burma, and there was all kinds of stuff kicking off. So I'm just happy to be here to tell the tale. But yeah,
wow!
But no helicopters. Although I would have liked one that night, to be honest. I would have liked one to
Where's that novel, Mr. D? Why haven't you written your own version of The Beach? You know,
exactly. That's brilliant. Now, Mark, something very interesting, a very interesting news story that piqued your interest this week.
Yeah, I mean, this is a conversation that's been going on all over book social media, and it's interesting timing, because just this last weekend I did a couple of events. I did a bookshop event, Little Green Bookshop in Herne Bay. I also did our local church Christmas fair, which Claire did over the summer with her children's book. She said that was really good, and I thought, she said, you should, it's just 15 quid for a table. You should go along, and I agreed to it months ago, and then it was coming up in the diary, and there's a little part of me thinking, I should probably cancel this. I'm going to sell 2 copies, and that's going to be it, if that, Anyway, went down a blooming storm. I'd one copy of The Crowfolk left. I kept selling it. And I tell you what, the number of people who bought all 3 books as well, amazing. Really? Absolutely amazing. Went down a storm. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, it's just fantastic.
You've just like discovered the ultimate place to sell your book. Yeah, I've got to say, Mark, I've done one too. And we literally sold out. We sold out of Jen's book. We had like 25 copies or something. It was the most ridiculous book sales. So, I mean, you just never, ever know, do you? And people are so, I think in those kind of environments, firstly, they're very grateful just to see a local author who's also quite well known, like a local author, just show up at those kind of events. And people were really, really supportive. Yeah. Wow. Was that one of your best ever, like,
absolutely. This was like better than Comic-Con. It was fantastic. And the timing's very interesting because I think there was the conversation is that there was ALCS, who is the licensing collection company in the UK, that if you've got a book, they make sure you get the royalties and lending rights and stuff like that. Yeah. They did a report, they did a survey, which I joined, I completed. So I was one of the authors surveyed in this. And they've discovered that in the UK, a writer's median average earnings have dropped to £7,000 per year.
Wow.
So the average author earns £7,000 a year from their writing. Now, in 2007, that was nearly 12.5 grand. Still not a lot, but it's a drop of 43%. And as usual, it's worse if you're a woman, and if you're non-white, they're earning even less. But here's the kicker. Here's the kicker as well. The top 10% of authors are earning 47% of all income. So there's this huge disparity with the big brand names sort of scooping up all the earnings. And also I read this week, this was a thing in Private Eye. I was reading, they were doing a review of the new Lee Child, Jack Reacher book. Now, Lee Child is retiring and his brother, Andrew, is taking over writing the Jack Reacher books. So for the moment, they say Lee Child and Andrew Child. And eventually it will just be Andrew Child writing Jack Reacher. So it's kind of a family business. One is transferring over to the other. And it was just a note, this little thing in this article, which I thought was really interesting because they pointed out David Baldacci, Michael Connelly, Ian Rankin, Lee Child, all in their 60s. Stephen King, James Patterson are 75. So, and the characters like Harry Bosch, the Michael Connelly's Harry Bosch is 71. Rebus is 75. A lot of our male best-selling authors are getting on a bit. So these are the top 10% who are, vacuuming up a lot of this income. But, death or retirement doesn't, Lee Child is retiring, his brother's taking over. These are going to be Jack Reacher books. Robert Ludlum, when I was at Orion, Robert Ludlum died, I think, before I joined Orion, and we were still selling his books, on the back of the Bourne movies, and there were new Robert Ludlum books coming out. Wilbur Smith died earlier this year or last year, and there is, Wilbur Smith, air quotes, signed a 10-book deal with Macmillan. There are more books coming. So it looks like, you're seeing this huge disparity between these huge brand authors, but there doesn't seem to be any sign that publishers are nurturing the new brands.
The next generation.
Exactly. Yeah. Instead, they're saying, well, if an author dies, we'll just put their name on something new and get someone else in. This is why Terry Pratchett, did you hear this? Terry Pratchett, when he died, put it in his will, he had his hard drives destroyed. A computer hard drive, which had at least 10 unpublished books on it, was destroyed by, he took it to the Great Dorset Steam Fair where it was crushed by Lord Jericho, which was a 6.5-ton steamroller. So he definitely, and it occurred to me, I had this great event. One of the best things I've done this year is setting up a store on my website where you can buy books directly from me and I sign them and dedicate them to you. I've earned more money from those than I have from my publisher this year.
Wow. That's incredible.
It's not huge numbers. The money I've made, not a huge amount of money this year, but not a bad amount of money. But most of that has come through movie and TV stuff. Yeah. The publishing side of things hasn't been great. And what has come through has come through me selling the stuff myself, getting some stock in and selling it on. So, you know, there's this huge debate going on at the moment about how do authors earn money? How do we nurture new talent? How do we get people who aren't independently wealthy and have a day job and a family to look after and all that kind of thing? How do they look to break through? So this is, you know, there are no easy answers to any of this, but I know there's a huge conversation going on at the moment, and it does feel like feels like we're on a bit of a tipping point with all these big name authors getting so old. Our publisher's going to finally go, ooh, you know, we better do something.
Well, I think there's definitely a sense of clinging on to the past. I think. I mean, when you look at those stats that you mentioned, and obviously I haven't delved deep into the article, but like 2007 compared to today, I'd love to see the statistic of how many more books are being published overall in the last 15 plus years, because my sense is, because of the boom in independent publishing, there's probably a ton more authors out there, and it might be that the amount of money that's being generated is now being shared across a wider base, which is why it's dropped a bit. I mean, possibly not. But I think what's more fascinating is, where do major publishers go next? Because we hear this in the music industry. We see this, like, if you think about, and again, get me World Cup reference in, but like, if you didn't nurture the next generation of, you know, they always talk about, the average age of the team's in their 30s. If you're not nurturing the new, like, you know, Ramoses of this world that put the oldies like Ronaldo in their place, you know, then you've ultimately got a situation where, you know, you have to regenerate. But what always happens is, when that happens, when a team kind of like falls on their face and they realize, God, we just haven't got the legs anymore, they have to start their academies again, and they have to start from scratch. And I think that's probably what we're going to see in the major publishing companies. They're hanging on to, because if you think about the percentage of income that they're getting from those big authors, to try and replace that overnight is a scary thing. So they're going to hang on to that and keep, almost like you say, the brand is becoming less about the author. The author almost becomes secondary, and it becomes more about the series or the surname or the character. And that's what they'll keep doing until eventually they realize that is not a long-term gain. So I'm curious to see who the new, I think some of the new big names will come through the hybrid route. People that have self-published, established themselves, and then been able to negotiate the big deals. And then they become the next blockbusters. I
mean, I know, you know, you've got the LJ Rosses and the Mark Dawsons of this world Mark Dawson was published by Permalinks and didn't like how he was treated, so he self-published. LJ Ross took one look at the contract that she was offered and said, no, I can do better myself. And I know a few authors who have dipped a toe, having had success in self-publishing, have dipped a toe into traditional publishing and have gone, I've lost all control. I prefer to have control. You know, there's a prestige that comes with traditional publishing, but you relinquish a lot of control. So, I mean, myself, I'm loving my Woodville series. My publisher's been great, but I'm writing something at the moment where I'm thinking,
which way should I go?
And I'm seriously tempted to self-publish.
Well, here's the interesting thing, is that before self-publishing became an established way of getting a book out there, people didn't have the option. And it's because people now have the option. Which way shall I go? Shall I self-publish? Shall I go with the traditional? Shall I be a hybrid author and do a bit of both? Because we have the choice today, that's one of the most freeing things in the world, but it also complicates stuff because it means there's more permutations. Sometimes it's better to know, okay, this is the only way I can do it, and I've just got to follow that path. Now we have more choices than ever, which is very empowering, but it also means we have more choices than ever. We have to kind of try to make the right choice now out of, you know, 1,000,001 options rather than 101 options. And I think that can be quite overwhelming for people. And I see that a lot actually when I coach independent artists of any nature, whether it's music, writing. They're all overwhelmed with making the wrong decision, and that creates paralysis, and they end up not making any decision. I like the idea of, it doesn't matter which route you go, just decide for the next book which one you want to try. Right? You've got your whole lifetime to put books out, ideally. But we're definitely in a state of flux right now. When we bring the wide angle lens back over history, it might seem like a very short period of time, this 5, 10, 15, 20 years we're going through. But when we look at it historically, it will be the biggest ever change the publishing industry has ever seen. And we're right in the middle of it, swimming around going, all right, what do we grab hold of? It's just like, so it's not easy, which is why we're here to kind of talk about it, I think, because I get more fascinated every episode we do, because we just go deeper into the rabbit hole and you realize, wow, it just keeps going. There's this never ending route of options. And then everything's changing around us as well at the same time.
I think traditional publishing should be worried, because once these brands start leaving us one way or the other, and if they've not nurtured the next generation, and that next generation has realized they can earn a lot more money by self-publishing, then they're going to, they used to be the be-all and end-all, and they're not anymore. So it'll be interesting to see how they react to that.
Do you know what I think they should do? Major publishers should think about partnering, like football clubs do, with an academy. Like, so they basically, you see where I'm going with this, don't you?
Can you hear the cogs? Listeners, listen very carefully. Listen, you can hear the cogs whirring.
Can you hear the cogs whirring? Because actually, when you think about it, I mean, it's the academies of this world, the writing schools of this world that nurture the new talent and are actually doing the nurturing and working with, authors of every age group, but who are moving in and getting that level of support that they need to then go out into the world. So weirdly enough,
can you think of one off the top of your head?
No, I can't think of anyone actually. But if any major publishers are out there, like connect with some writing schools and maybe do some deals with them. And because there's people out there that we know, I mean, just from our experience as well, I mean, joking aside, but we know that within the Bestseller Academy, we have potential writers of that kind of scale in the future, don't we? I mean, I know a couple of our academics who have published books who were as good, if not better, than stuff that was published, at the publishers where I've worked, who lost patience with the industry and just thought, I'm putting this out myself. Yeah. And that is the loss of traditional publishing. That's traditional publishing's loss. And their own gain. It's those the authors. It's their own gain, and they, So this is, I think we're on the cusp of something here. Interesting. Watch this space, folks. If you're interested in this, if you've got an opinion on it, drop us a note. Pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com and click on the contact us and tell us what your experiences have been. Maybe you're a traditionally published author that's thinking of jumping ship, or maybe you're an independent author who's fed up with self-publishing and desperately still wants to link up but wants the actual support and nurturing that maybe used to happen and also we're very broad brushing this. I mean, there are great publishers out there, and they're not so great publishers. There are great individuals in publishing companies and not so great individuals. So we know that we're generalizing a lot here, and we're not trying to diss the industry in particular, but I think it's important that there's a bigger strategic thing that needs to be talked about here across the whole industry.
I plan to continue doing both and that's my choice because I can.
Absolutely. Well, that's the freedom bit, right? And I think that's where it's incredibly empowering. Fantastic stuff. Now, talking of published authors,
nice segue.
Nice segue, because there's a lot about publishers in this. Interesting. There's a lot about publishers in this, particularly around book titles, if you've ever been interested in how that works with publishers. But Mark, tell us about our guest today, Elizabeth Noble.
Elizabeth Noble is a Sunday Times #1 best-selling author who sold over 1 million books to date. Her debut novel, The Reading Group, she wrote that to avoid going back to work. It became an instant #1 bestseller. She was nominated for Newcomer of the Year, the British Book Awards. Book sold over 250,000 copies. She's written many bestsellers since, and her latest, Other People's Husbands, is her 10th novel. And we discuss how her debut had a ready-made structure, writing big casts of characters, and how she got back into writing after a 6-year break.
Brilliant. Fascinating stuff, folks. So, strap your seatbelt and have a listen to this. This is a fantastic interview. And let's listen to Mark chatting with the lovely Elizabeth Noble.
Elizabeth Noble, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, Mark. Nice to be here with you.
Oh, we're delighted to speak to you, especially as you've got this fantastic new book out, Other People's Husbands. Now, you've often written about families and those twisted, complex relationships that we all know about, but this is a very different kind of social group. Tell us about the characters in Other People's Husbands.
Other People's Husbands is about a group of, I call them schoolgate friends. They are a group of women around my age, the danger years, and they have been friends since their little ones were at nursery, essentially. So it's one of those almost closer than family groups of friends who have literally watched their children grow up, and they've grown together, been through all of the ups and downs, the roller coaster that is ordinary life. And they've reached this point. The children are grown up, the nests are empty, and it's about the damage that can be done to a group that believes its bonds are as tight as bonds can be by the bad decision of a couple of members.
Right. And this is 6 couples and their children. Some of the children are adults and they've got their own complex lives. I mean, that gets, with each couple you introduce, that gets more and more complex by an order of magnitude. Was that a very daunting challenge to write, thinking about all those lives and how they would intertwine and how you would keep track of them?
No, it's that's an interesting point you make. I'm often asked about it, and I have never been able to do it any other way. We all have big lives. We all have a big cast in our life. And when I write fiction, I don't find it easy to write a small cast. And I know that sometimes my readers will say, it took me a while to figure out who was who. But then, that's right. That's what I'm hoping. I'm not trying to make it difficult for readers, but I find it more authentic when people have a lot of moving parts in their life, and I don't always find fiction authentic when it's just a single sort of storyline, and I often find myself thinking, well, doesn't this person have a mother? Doesn't this person have friends she goes for coffee with? And it frustrates me slightly as a reader. So I'm aware of the potential criticism of doing it that way, but it's the only way I know how to do it. And this book has, I think of it as a Jilly Cooper list. Do you remember when, writers and they all had the cast list in the beginning, and they're actually quite helpful because you can kind of flip backwards and forwards and check who's who. And this has one. So no, for me, I don't find it complicated at all because they are very real in my head. And so that would be like me confusing my neighbor on the left with my neighbor on the right. You don't do it. So for me, when I write them, no confusion. I recognize that occasionally it takes a reader a little while to sort of sort them out. But what I'm always hoping for is that it's worth it in the end.
That's brilliant. How are you though keeping track? Are you just keeping track of them in your head, or are you using Post-it notes or cards or any kind of system like that?
Yeah, I have notes, and it's we always joke in my house that it's the stage when my husband and children, if they're around, think I'm not doing anything, and I say I'm growing my characters. And so I usually have a notebook in which I will have a lot of information about them that probably never ever makes it to the page. So it makes them real for me. So I will know what kind of music they listen to. I probably know how they voted in Brexit. I probably know, what they dress like, occasionally how they smell. So they do sort of germinate in my head, and they become really real to me. And I find that a really useful part of the process, because then it's not so much you deciding what they would think or what they would do. It's kind of them informing you about what they would think or what they would do in a given situation. So it kind of makes it easier to keep them separate and keep them authentic and keep them true to themselves as characters, if that makes sense.
It does. And all that detail you're sort of building up as you go in these notebooks, is that something that you're doing before you write the first draft, or is it as you're writing? How does that work?
Yeah, usually before. I have the idea, And the idea sort of sits and it will lodge itself and almost sort of demand to be written. And then the characters come, and then I write the end, which is something I have done with all except my first novel. Every subsequent novel, I sort of write probably a prologue and then my ending. And the ending can change. It's not set in stone, but it for me in the writing process, it's incredibly helpful to have the destination at least plotted out for the time being.
Very good. That's fascinating. We'll come to your first novel in a minute because I really want to know how that came about. But I'm fascinated by this. You know, we talk about this is a group. You said the Schoolgate friends, but of course there are families in there. Families is a constant theme throughout your books, but in particular, the thing that I've noticed, it's usually when families reach a turning point. And it's funny because I'm going through this at the moment. You know, my younger son's off to university. My daughter's got, you know, she's in a relationship. The last sort of 20 years have been kind of set in stone. We've all got our roles, and now the roles are changing. And that seems to be something that happens in your books. It's about those pivots in family life. Is that something you keep coming back to? Are you conscious of that, or is it just something that happens?
Yeah, I just think that without it, you wouldn't have a story. You need a shifting sands in order to hook a story onto it. It wouldn't be any fun to read a book about a family where all the balls were in the air, because that would just be a juggler with all the balls in the air. And I think balls need to fall before you have a point of interest, if you like. In real life, we like it the complete opposite. We like all the balls in the air all the time. But if you're wanting to make a decent story, you really got to drop a few of the balls. And then the story is about how you pick them up. I think that's probably what I would say about that.
Yes, we do enjoy it when it goes wrong for other people, don't we? It's just
occasionally. Most of us are no strangers to Schadenfreude, but we don't like to admit it.
Now I hope don't think I'm being rude, Elizabeth, but I saw in another interview that you described yourself as nosy, and Erica James said something similar about herself as well. Do you think this is essential for being a writer? Let's call it curiosity. Do you think this is essential for being a writer?
I think if you're writing the type of books that I'm trying to write, I think it is. And I call it nosy to save someone else the trouble of labeling it as such. But really, it's a kind of, I think all people are interesting. I think everybody has stories and experiences, and I think if you're a writer, you listen to all of it and you pour it into your giant melting pot, and I certainly never write autobiographical fiction, but right. I think my characters have little bits of all the people I've met and spoken to. So yeah, I think you have to be a curator of stories to be a storyteller. And there's no original thought, essentially, is there? There's nothing I can write about that happens to people that hasn't happened to someone. So it's about how you interpret it and how you weave it together to make your own unique story. But yeah, I would sit with anyone and see if I could get them to tell me stories about them.
Yeah, I think it is developing a kind of a radar for that kind of little bits of interest in other people. You know, you'll meet someone and go, "Oh, he's a character. I'm gonna," you know. Do you keep these in a notebook? Do you keep a record of these, or do you just file them away mentally?
No, I think they just sort of soak in. You know, I have an elephantine memory for things I don't need to remember. I can't remember most of my passwords, and occasionally not my PIN numbers, but I remember things that someone told me on a ferry 15 years ago, and clearly that's just how my brain works.
Well, we're very grateful that it does. Let's talk about where it all started for you, which, I mean, your debut, The Reading Group, which came out 20 years ago, which is... Listeners, Lizzie just pulled a face. Let's talk about what led up to that, because as I understand it, you started writing because you wanted to bring up your daughters, you wanted to take a career break, but that was also an opportunity to write. So can you tell us about leading up to that and what that was like?
Yeah, absolutely. I read English literature at university, and then I went to work for a publishing house, one of the grand old dames of publishing, all those years ago. And I spent a lot of time trying to get noticed, and taking home books from the slush pile to read, and reading everything I could so that I could, try to get along. And I often had that thought of, I'd like to do that. I could do that. I'd like to try to do that. And then when I got married, I had 2 babies in close succession, and I really didn't want to go back to work because it was so much fun being at home with them. And I thought, well, this would be the time to give it a try. It will work or it won't work. What I had picked up most from my time in the publishing world, short and unillustrious though it undoubtedly was that everything was hugely competitive, and I needed a hook. I needed to be able to sell my novel in 2 lines. And my great piece of good fortune was that in 2003, everybody was talking about book clubs and reading groups.
Yeah.
They were they've been around for decades. I'm sure some of the oldest reading groups have been around, for several generations. But Oprah had just started doing her book club in the States, and everybody was either talking about joining one. And I suddenly thought I'd had some characters and some storylines floating around in my brain, but I'd always known I needed a hook. And I just kind of had a light bulb above the head moment. I was invited to join a reading group, as so many people were that year. And I suddenly thought, gosh, this would be amazing, because you could put anyone you want in this reading group, as long as you can come up with a plausible reason for how they know each other. So it's the perfect umbrella setting for a story. And the other great gift that I've always been really grateful for about it is that it gave me a structure. As a first-time novelist, I was very comfortable writing a kind of 50 pages of my book. And what was really harder was plotting the whole thing. But because these characters were reading group friends, there's my novel. They meet once a month for a year, 12 months. I've always been incredibly grateful for that, because it created a kind of skeleton for me to hang my novel on. And I sometimes wonder whether I would have been able to do it if I hadn't had that. The third piece of great good luck was that I had a really pretentious, silly title for this first novel, which I was very much wedded to. And my brilliant publishers at Hodder kept using the title The Reading Group, and I just kind of ignored it. And I thought, well, that's their working title for it, but we're going with the other title. And of course they won. Why wouldn't they? And thank goodness, because as my husband, who's also in publishing, likes to tell me, the one I had was a warehouse filler of a novel, whereas a book called The Reading Group, published in 2004, had an immediate appeal to a really big base of readers, because they were such a zeitgeist thing.
Can you tell us what that original title was?
Oh, I knew you would ask me that, Mark. I pretend I don't remember, but it was, in fact, Skipping Over Treacle. Yeah, the warehouse filler.
I love it. I do love it because that's a fun title. It's playful, tells you absolutely nothing about the book. No, that was just me and my little imagination. But the publishers knew what they were doing, and my goodness, they were right, because the week that book published, it went straight to #1 in the Sunday Times list. And whatever delusions I might have about myself, I do know that was solely because it had that great title. Hopefully it sort of kept selling because it was a great book, but it was that made it the big success it was off the bat. So thank goodness for them. Well, let's talk about that. I mean, debut novel, smash hit, straight to #1. What was that? What do you remember of that experience? Because it's the thing we all dream of, but it's what was it like? Was it everything you expected? Were there surprises along the way? I mean, obviously you'd worked in publishing, so you kind of knew what that could be like, but what was it like for you?
Oh, it's wildest dream stuff. There's no there's no getting away from that. It is beyond your wildest dream when your first novel comes out. It's absolutely terrifying. It sounds silly to say, but you having it read by people other than people who know you is a very weird and discombobulating feeling, and you feel quite vulnerable. You can also feel quite upset if anything says unkind or anyone says anything that demonstrates to you that they've misunderstood something you're trying to say.
Yeah.
So it's a very weird process. The actual day that the charts came out, I'd been with a publicist from Hodder stock signing in central London, which is a very thankless task, because you unless you're big and important, you sort of stand in the corner and sign a few books on a teetering pile of books, and other people look at you as if to say, are you vandalizing those books?
Yeah.
And someone will come up, someone with a better brass neck than me will come up and stand beside you and look at your book and flick through it and then put it down and walk away.
Yeah,
and
I've had that.
You're thinking, right, okay, I'm really this is really not good. So I can actually remember that I had persuaded the publicist that we needed to go into a shop that had a sale on, and I was therefore in a changing cubicle with no trousers on when she took the wall. that the numbers were in, and the numbers were really good. So there you go.
Is that now your lucky changing cubicle? Do you go there every Tuesday now when the figures come in?
Oh, I should wish I could still fit into those trousers. 20 years, remember? 20 years.
Now, does that spoil an author, your first novel going straight to number one? Do you expect it to happen every time now? Because I know I used to work for a sales department in a publisher, and that was always the fear, because we got them to number one once, they're going to want it every time now. So what's the experience been like since?
Well, the elephant in the room is that it's never happened again.
Right.
And I could tell you all the reasons. I think they've mostly gone into the 10. But it's a very different and an ever-changing world.
Yes.
And yes, I would say, at the risk of sounding ungrateful, it was a glorious, wonderful, happy thing, and a bit like winning the US Open. No one can ever take it away from you. It happened, and forevermore it can be a strapline on your book. But yes, it does make some fairly big shoes for your next book to fill. And of course, writing is a lonely and solitary and self-doubting experience. So yes, it made me very frightened to sit down. And number two was much harder to write than number one, because in a way, with number one, I was kind of doing it with no real knowledge. And then of course you have the knowledge, and you are trying to replicate it, and you're trying to do something that people think is just as good, if not better. And I would say, I know everybody's different. I love the fact that if you've got 100 writers in a room, you'll get 100 completely different stories about that experience and how it feels. But for me, I've almost found each one harder than the last one. And I look back on writing the first one as almost a time of blissful ignorance.
Yeah.
It gets harder each time for me, actually.
Yeah, that's not unusual. I'm interested, particularly in that second book, because you said from the second book onwards, you'd written the ending and then gone back to the beginning. What was it that sort of triggered you to do that? That was this something that you learned in the editorial process of the first book, or was it just you thought, this is how I have to do it now?
Well, I spoke a little bit about the structure of the reading group. My second novel, I obviously didn't have a nice, helpful sort of paint by numbers way of doing it. And I think I found it clarifying to think, right, here they are. This is where they're starting. Where do I think they want to end up? And I think forgive me if this sounds pretentious, but I always remember this from university, that there was an author that, I think it was George Eliot, although I need to check that if I'm going to say it. But her view of life and fate was that we're all on a ship, and you can't change the destination of the ship, but you can move around the ship. Right. That's the thing I've always remembered, and I used that idea to think, right, okay, where is the ship of this novel sailing to?
Yeah.
then that gives you the freedom to change the journey as much as you want to or you need to. Excellent. But you've got your sort of safe port in front of you. And I love it when you hear particularly a thriller or a mystery writer saying they don't know who done it when they start. I can't get enough of that, because I just cannot begin to imagine how that process works for them. But for me, it works too, because the central core of what I'm trying to do with every novel is make you, the reader, care. We all read for different reasons, and most of us read for a kind of smorgasbord of reasons. But my defining mission when I'm reading, whether it's a book, a shortlisted prize, or a book I bought at the airport for a holiday, I want to care about the characters. And so as a writer, I want you to care about my characters. And so I think that maybe deciding how I'm going to leave them frees me to write the rest of their story. If that doesn't sound absolute nonsense, I think that's what that's about.
I love it. I do a kind of a similar thing. I like to know where the finish line is as well. I like to, and then I go to the opposite of that, and then take them through that journey and torture them along the way. And that's
and I think again, if I'm looking for things that all of my novels have in common, it is a redemptive flick of the tail. I can't really leave them alone unless there's an upturn at the end, and you sort of know that broadly they're going to be okay. And at the beginning, I think I was a bit too neat and a bit too determined to square off everything and leave it bandbox. And I think as I've gone along, I've gotten slightly more confident about leaving maybe a bit of a question, or certainly a sort of a slight fill in the gap for the reader. But nothing annoys me more than a novel that isn't properly finished. I can't bear it. Tell me what happened. They're your characters. Yeah. It's your story. You tell me the end of it. And so I've always sort of, I write like a reader, if that makes sense. And things that annoy me as a reader, I try really hard not to do as a writer.
Brilliant. That's superb advice. I want to talk about one of your books in particular, Between a Mother and Her Child, which I think is a very traumatic novel in that it deals with a couple breaking up after the death of a teenage son, I believe, isn't it? And I know that you took a long break after that. As it was because it was very affecting. Can you talk about that and the break, and what brought you back to writing after that?
Yeah, I can talk about it, and I say at the beginning that I have the permission of the child involved to talk about it. Well, in my personal life, things were very difficult at that point. I'd been living in the States with my husband, who was working there, and my two daughters, and one of my daughters was very deeply unhappy in America, and I felt a great need to bring her home. And it didn't work with my husband's career. My husband had commitments, and he's the sort of man that doesn't walk away from commitments. So we lived a weird sort of hybrid life where I came home with the girls and lived in a house, and he stayed in New York where we'd been living. And rather than fixing my daughter's unhappiness, it sort of got worse, and she was in a very bad place, and I was at home without my husband, who is my main person. And I was, at the same time as my personal life was difficult, and I was incredibly worried about both my children, but specifically one of them, I was then sitting down every day to write the story of a mother who had lost her child. And the two things sort of, for the first time ever, my writing life and my personal life completely overlaid each other. And because I was the only adult in my home, there was no leavening at the end of the day. So I was living her life and my own life, and neither of those lives were in a very good place. And I think I probably sort of dug myself into a pit writing it. Right. And I found it difficult always to talk about it. And I sort of thought, this is a masochistic part of my life at this point. I'm not going to do it anymore. So I took a step back. And at that point, I really wasn't sure whether I would ever be able to write again. And it was about 6 years, I think, 6 years or so before all of the things in my life resolved. and I felt the urge to tell stories again. It was a scary experience, actually, because I'd always kept writing. I always thought writing was the best job ever, and it was a perfect job to do while my kids were small, and a wonderful, a fabulous thing to do. And writing was always a lovely job, but it stopped being that with Between a Mother and Her Child and became something darker for me.
Did you have another novel sort of lined up after that book that you had to abandon?
Yeah, several. There are outlines and synopses. I was under contract, to be honest. So the publisher, although everybody has always been very, very kind and very understanding, it's a job, and I had a contract, and I was supposed to write lots of things. But for me, I think you can put words on a page, if you have to, but that doesn't mean they're worth reading. And nothing I wrote during the time I was trying to fulfill my contractual obligations ever struck me as any good. And I wasn't proud of it, and I wasn't involved in it somehow. It was almost going through the machinations of doing it without any of the soul.
Right.
So there are a few notebooks kicking around here somewhere with some disastrously bad ideas and opening chapters, I think.
Right. But when was the point where you felt that you got your mojo back, or was it just that you missed it, or that enough time had passed?
Well, my personal stuff all sort of came good. My daughter grew up and came through that phase of her life unscathed, thank goodness. My husband came home. We moved house, and so I think that's not nothing. But also, I had an idea. I had the idea, and in fact, I had a person. I had Iris, who was the star of the novel that came after Between a Mother and Her Child. Iris just popped up and said, "Hey, how about it?" And it was lovely. It was because I had really sort of wondered whether it would ever happen, and
right.
Then Iris happened. So
brilliant. Thank you, Iris. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that, Elizabeth. That can't have been easy. What's coming next from you, Elizabeth?
I am. There's a war in my head. I have another contemporary fiction novel that I got the idea from a chance remark a friend made at a dinner party in the summer. But I'm actually working on a piece of historical fiction, which is a massive, massive departure for me, and terrifying because, gosh, that's difficult. Yeah. You kind of write a page of story, and then you have a page of questions next to the page of story. And this is about a period of history that's been written about a lot, but I think I found something that hasn't been written about. And a lot of the research I've done has been anonymous, and I feel a tremendous responsibility to get it right when I tell the stories of these incredibly wonderful people who aren't here to tell their own stories. So, gosh, I write, he was on the train, and then I think, was there a train from there to there in this time period? And what was he wearing? What was he eating? And how did it smell? And so God knows when I'll be able to kind of produce anything to show anyone on that. But I found a thing that just really, really got me excited, and I thought, no, I'm going to try. I'm really going to try.
Brilliant. No, my books are all set in 1940, and I just get to the end, then do the research, because I find that thing of, oh gosh, would they have had a kettle? How would that have, just these tiny day-to-day things drive you absolutely nuts. So I worry about them at the end. Yeah.
So that's how you do it. You write your story and then you add your history. It's interesting. Okay, yeah. I'm writing that down, Mark.
Well, that down. That's a tip we got from Ian Rankin on the podcast, because he said that he just writes his rebus thrillers, then he goes back and does all the detective stuff and researches that, because then he knows he's only researching the stuff that he needs for that particular story, rather than getting bogged down in research. So we thank Ian for that. That's really good advice.
I also slightly feel at the moment, and I'm going to use a word that I'm sure most writers that you speak with have in their heads, which is procrastination.
Oh, yeah.
And historical research is one of the great legitimate forms of procrastination in my world, where I think, well, I fall down a rabbit hole on the laptop and the morning has gone. So I think I'm going to have to sort of find a very disciplined way of doing it. And that sounds like a good one.
Brilliant. Sorry to have put off your procrastination. I do enjoy it myself, but yeah, it does help. Elizabeth, thank you so much for that. Folks, Other People's Husbands and all of Elizabeth's books are out there now. Go grab them and you definitely won't regret it. These are big emotional roller coasters that are just full of great character and life. So Liz, thank you so much for speaking to us today and hope to speak to you again soon.
A great pleasure. Thank you.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. Oh my gosh, Mark, lots to unpack. We're going to have a lot to chat about in the extended edition of this podcast this week. But let's dive in first and talk about the multiple characters that she talked about. This was fascinating. Big casts.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard enough writing a protagonist and an antagonist.
Yes.
I mean,
it really is.
We're talking about an entire street worth of couples in Elizabeth's kind of setup there, and especially in an early novel as well, where you're starting out. That was some challenge.
She made a really, really interesting point, which is that if characters in books if you can't at least hint at their extended lives, then they become unbelievable. And I know that it's something that when I'm writing, I'm so focused on the character that you start thinking, well, hang on, who are their parents? And if they've got parents, do they have aunts and uncles? And if they've got aunts and uncles, I mean, are they cousins and are they brothers and sisters and are they best friends? And suddenly, with one character, you could be thinking of 12 to 20 additional characters who could possibly walk through the door at any moment. You know what our lives are like, the sort of phone calls we get every day. Yeah. So it can get a bit overwhelming. So I'm aware of who those characters are, but then you have to make a choice about who's important to the story, who's relevant to the story, who do we bring in? But of course, the thing with Elizabeth is she's writing family dramas. So you can't really avoid this. The family, if you're writing about modern contemporary family lives and all the ups and downs of that, then you kind of do have to bring in all those couples. This has got 6 couples plus kids, and as she said, we've all got big lives. But what I thought was really interesting is she said that she gets feedback from readers who say, took me a while to figure out who's who, but then. So readers do, you do have to trust the reader, I think, sometimes.
It's hard though, isn't it? Because I when I started reading Game of Thrones, like within the first chapter, I was like, what? Who? Oh, and I almost thought I had to have like a notepad just to kind of like every time I heard a new name, I wrote it down and had to kind of almost be a detective so I could, because my brain doesn't work very well when I'm given, like, give me a couple of characters, I'm good. Chuck in like 15 different, I don't even know who belongs to what clan and so I think it's a lot to ask of an author, but if you can make it work, then it's an incredible accomplishment. Yeah. But also I think it also reminds me a bit of how people must write for soap operas. Like if you think of EastEnders, there are main characters, but it's the lives of many people and it's how they all interact together. Now, with EastEnders, of course, they have thousands, it feels like, of episodes to develop those characters and storylines, but to kind of have 6 couples plus kids in one book, that's incredible. But it's about how you hold on to them, I think, in those first 2 chapters to keep them, to get the familiarity.
Yeah, you don't want to overwhelm the reader in the first couple of chapters. It's there is a skill to drip feeding this information in. There are very basic tools you can use to help the reader as well. I mean, you can have a cast of characters at the beginning. Yeah. Yesterday I interviewed Simon Scarrow, coming in 2023. Fantastic interview, listeners. Talked to Simon Scarrow, who's 21 books into a series and these are Roman historical epics. So, you open up the book and you've got a cast of characters and you've got maps. So if you ever do get lost, they're right there. You can just flick to it and go, oh, okay, yes, all right, fine. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Brilliant. So if it's, I know some people might resist that, but I know readers find that really, really helpful.
Absolutely. No, for sure. That's brilliant stuff. Now, one of the comments that you said that was interesting was this idea of being nosy as an author.
I love this. It's curiosity. It's nothing nosy. You're just curious. You're just curious, But
it's true, isn't it? Like, how curious are we as writers? I think writers are have to naturally be curious about the world around them. As part of what fascinates us about writing and about people, about the world that we see, and about our own in insular kind of interiors of our own lives as well. But I love this. We all know those kind of people, though, don't we? They're very, very good at just constantly asking questions.
It's something I've cultivated I never used to be good at it, but it's funny when I started working in publishing, because you might be taking an author around for the day on bookshop signings, or you might be sat next to someone at a conference dinner or whatever. So you're on your best behavior because you're representing the company. Also, you have to give, because very often authors as well are quite shy creatures. So you have to draw stuff out of them. And it's something that I've sort of nurtured over time. So just this event, this Church Fate event I was talking about at the weekend, I was talking to one of the organisers, a guy called Les. Hi, Les. And, I got his life story and it was great. And all the places he's been and the people he's met. And he was talking about overcoming illnesses and big turning points in his life. And of course, there are bits of Les that, whether he likes it or not, are probably going to end up in a novel one day.
Totally.
This is not all of Les, because that's not fair on him. But there will be elements of him and elements of other people and people that I meet that go into stories and characters, because it's those little bits of realism that we love.
Interesting. And we also have this idea that we have to travel somewhere far away to find those characters, to find those stories. But it reminds me that there are stories waiting for people on every park bench.
Yeah.
Right. And if you think about, later on in the extended, we're going to talk about, where you get inspiration from, or where the surprising places are that you can get inspiration from. But it's really important to remember that you never know where your next character is going to come from. And it probably will be on that bus journey, or, sitting on that park bench and someone coming along. And I think the world around us is fascinating. And it's always changing and always surprising. And, having that curiosity, having your radar open to that, I should say, is where you're going to find the really great stuff. It's right there in front of you.
Absolutely. And it's not always strangers. It can be your own family,
completely. If you want dysfunction, then that's the place to go.
Especially my lot.
I say that, and Jess, because I love my family, but it comes from a quote that I once heard that every family has its own brand of weirdness.
Oh yeah,
I love that. Right? We all do. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Just got to ask the right questions and listen.
Well, and actually, now's the time. Like most people, here's a positive thought to put into people's minds as we come into the Christmas world. We're looking forward to our Christmas special in a few weeks, and we're actually going to go into the forest today, it used to be the Queensland. I guess it's now the Kingsland, because you're allowed in Canada to chop a tree down on the Queen's land, or the King's Land in Canada.
Right.
You know that? You're allowed it in some 18th century edict. Every peasant can go along and get a free tree.
Oh, we'll have to have a word with Charlie and put an end to that.
I know, I might have to keep my eyes open. But here's a thought for Christmas. There's always a lot of sense of dread, especially now post-COVID. We don't have the excuse of, we can't be up this month. COVID. Yeah. We all have to get together with our families again. And isn't it brilliant if we were to go into that rather than dreading it and thinking, oh, God and Uncle, I shouldn't say any names because there's probably going to be lots of Uncle Charlies and George, but uncles and aunties, the very colourful characters that many families have in their life. It can sometimes be a dreadful kind of countdown into can we just get to Boxing Day, please? How about you flick it this year and say, look, I'm going to be given some brilliant material. So bring it on. Let's have the craziest Christmas ever. And I'm going to have my notebook.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Well, record it on your phone with the knowledge. Just say to them, here's a sherry, Gran. Tell me something you've never told anyone else before.
Yeah. Or let's get a board game out where they have to talk about their life or something. Brilliant. It's just not Cards Against Humanity, because we know that is. We always have to mention that every Christmas, don't we? Because I never forget that story you told me about your gran. But moving on, if you missed that, you've got to go back. You've got to go back a few years. Let's talk about, I love this line that Elizabeth said, making readers care for your characters. I mean, she pretty much distilled the entire process of writing a novel. It all distills down to that one line.
Stories are all about empathy. It's about telling someone else's journey of change and making you feel it, which is really hard to do. We talk about things like save the cat in order to, feel empathetic with the character, but it's not always that easy. And I love what she said. She said, I write like a reader. Things that annoy me as a reader, I try not to do as a writer. And it's very clear that she's not one for taking shortcuts. She's not one for avoiding difficult topics or subjects because they might be tricky to write or hard to write. And this is something I've found as well. Earlier on as a writer, you come up against something that felt complicated or hard or morally complex, and you just thought, let's skip around that, let's get to the action. But I've learned that actually, if you can address that stuff head on and be as honest as you can about it, that's when you get people messaging you when your books come out saying, that made me cry, that really moved me, that I was really thrilled by that, or it made me laugh. Whatever emotion, whatever your intent is as a writer, I think if, that kind of brutal honesty and kind of raw emotion, that's something that really, really affects readers as well. And it's tricky because you're putting yourself on the line, and you're putting your heart and soul into it. But readers really respond to that, and they recognize it, and they recognize shortcuts and when you're being cheap and not giving them the whole truth as well.
I think when you're willing to go deep, then the reader goes deep with you, and I think that's where real kind of strength and bonds are connected between writers and readers. It's
absolutely.
I think they sense that and they know that the author's kind of really gone out on a limb, and it's worth remembering that it's worth the effort. Absolutely. Now, we would love to chat about so many more things in this interview, and we're saving it for the extended version. And why is that, folks? Well, we do it because, firstly, we just don't have enough time to talk about everything we want to, but we'd also like to encourage you to subscribe to this podcast. We would love to have you on board as a patron, and patrons and Academy members get the extended version where we talk for another 20 minutes. And this week, we're going to chat about the importance of notebooks for germinating characters, writing prologues, then endings, how to sell your novel in 2 lines, looking at where inspiration will potentially come from. We're going to also talk a bit about this brilliant area of the benefit of having a publisher to help you with your title, which can make all the difference. We're going to delve a bit more into Elizabeth's kind of wildest dreams of selling, having a #1 debut novel, and then also some of the challenges that came from that. And talking about taking a break from writing for whatever reason, whether it's mental health or otherwise. And then finally, we're going to talk about the importance of remembering that every writer is going through something. So if you'd like to join us for this amazing extended episode, and folks, we have had so much incredible feedback. Thank you to everyone who's written to us. You said, I love the extended. It's so much good stuff there. Please subscribe to the podcast. It will help us make this podcast, keep this podcast on the road for you, and gives you even more kind of in-depth content about the incredible adventure of writing. So pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com/support to learn about how you can get access to the extended version.
Yeah, wonderful stuff. Got lots of little wins this week, and thanks for everyone for getting in touch with those. One on the Academy from Julian Schaefer. He said, finished my first draft, And it feels good. That is a good feeling. Congratulations, Julian. She said, I'm taking Mr. Stay's advice and putting it away. I'll decide on January 1st if I'm ready to start the first edit or revision, or if I'm going to let it sit for a full 6 weeks. Originally, I thought 6 weeks sounded too long to wait, but right now I think it sounds perfect. I'm having wine to celebrate, and as soon as it gets dark, the Christmas lights will be glowing. Okay, I've been turning them on every night for over a week, but tonight they will at least seem brighter. Cheers, everyone. Julian, huge congrats. Huge congrats on that. And the 6 week thing, this came from... It was, I think it was John Jarrold, the agent, who told me this at Galance Fest. He was doing a talk at Galance Fest, and it works for me. 6 weeks is the point where I come back to it, and it feels like it's almost been written by someone else. So, I think it's definitely worth waiting that time. Have you noticed a lot of people have been tagging us because we're cropping up on their Spotify most listened to podcast list? This is absolutely lovely. So, one of them was Susie Edge did this. So, we're number one on her top podcast. So thank you. And she's put, I should probably write a book, which she has done. Do check it out. Major bestseller this year. Wonderful stuff. So thanks to everyone who's tagged us on that. Kate Baker. Now, Kate, great academy, fantastic. She's got her book coming real soon. We're asked for her wins this week. She said, I've got 21 spaces on Rachel's Random Resources blog tour, all filled within 2 hours of her posting on Twitter. Now, Rachel's Random Resources is one of the great blog tour organizers, certainly in the UK. And for Kate to get 21 bloggers all clamoring to read and review her book, this is fantastic news. So this is absolutely brilliant. So congrats on that, Kate. But now Kate says, I now have the dreadful feeling people have waited so long for this damn novel. It's grown into something in their minds way bigger and better than it actually is. Imposter syndrome, alive and well, but I can still see the win. You can, Kate. People are going to love this book. I've read it and absolutely loved it as well. So fingers crossed. It's all going to be great. Jeff White, who started up, you may recall Jeff, fantasy author, writes as GM White, but he's also we're talking about author's income and having, different sources of income. He's been working as a copywriter. He says, my first content writing client loved the first draft of a post I write for them, so I'm cracking on with the second draft tonight. So it's little things like that. It's not all about novel writing. You can do copywriting, all sorts of stuff that you can do to earn a little bit of extra crust. Julian Barr dropped a line, says, I'm about halfway through writing my narrative history book, and my editing business is booked until the first week of February. And that worries me because I might have something for Julian to edit very soon. So I need to get in there and book him.
Stop mentioning him on the podcast.
Exactly, yeah. He said it's been a tough few years, but never made it this far without the encouragement and inspiration you guys have given me. So that's fantastic, Julian.
And I think that's great. And Julian's a great example of someone who took the plunge. He bungee jumped. He, quit the day job and went full time. And I'm so happy for him that it's working out and he's seeing those bookings coming in. So congratulations, Julian, and inspiring everyone else who's maybe sitting there thinking, maybe I need to do this as well.
Fantastic. And last but by no means least, Michaela Limpkin, who's with us on the Academy, she says, my book looks fantastic on Amazon's Look Inside feature, and I'm being officially launching the book tomorrow night. So it's being launched on the 8th of December, so it would have been gone by then. But you can grab a copy of Michaela's nonfiction book, How to Love and Be Loved, Tiny Steps to Connecting with Love and Life. You can grab a copy of that over on Amazon right now. So do check that out, and congratulations, Michaela. It looks absolutely amazing.
It's absolutely brilliant. And you know what I love about this? I love journeying with authors when they go through that first launch, the firsts of everything. Because I remember doing that with Back to Reality, and it's so exciting. Like the first time you see your page on Amazon, the first time you see your cover, the first sale you make. The firsts are brilliant and worth all the effort, folks. If you are working through that first book still and you're like, it's never going to get done, keep pushing through, because there's so much excitement that awaits you at the other end, so much joy and feeling of accomplishment, folks. Because I always say this, you write a book, no one's ever going to take that away from you. It's a life accomplishment. You'll lie on your deathbed feeling still proud of the fact that you achieved something that so many people in the world dream of doing, but never ever do it. So keep on pushing. And I think it's super important as well to remind people of how you can get in contact with us, Mark. So what the best ways, there's so many different ways to get in contact with us on there.
Absolutely. I mean, go to bestsellerexperiment.com. There's a contact tab there. You get a direct line to me and Mr. D. You can drop us a line there. Facebook, we're Bestseller Experiment. Twitter and Instagram, we're at BestsellerXP. So drop us a line there as well.
Fantastic. And don't forget, folks, if you would like to get the writing habit of a lifetime, it's 200wordchallenge.com. Try our free challenge. This is a great time to sign up, actually, just before the new year. You might want to go out the gates on January the 1st. Well, now is the time to sign up. Do a bit of warm-up exercise. Get a few days in under your belt before the new year, and then change the rest of your life by potentially writing many books that may never happen without this challenge, because we've seen that. So make sure you go along and sign up to 200wordchallenge.com. And don't forget, the Academy is opening its doors again at the beginning of the new year. So if you would like to find out more about what the Academy is about, pop along, listen back to episode 400 on the podcast, where we interviewed 6 Academy members and we documented their incredible story. And if you want to hear that podcast, you can just go to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com, because it's on the front page of the Academy now. So pop along and have a listen to that. Sign up to one of the webinars that we've got, one of the free webinars, to find out more, and submit your application this side of 2022 to avoid disappointment. So that's academy.bestsellerexperiment.com.
All links in the show notes, folks. All links in the show notes.
Brilliant. And a big thanks to our editors, to JD and Dave. Big thanks to all of you for supporting this podcast. And big thanks to Plotter, who supported this podcast today as well by sponsoring it. And if you would like to sponsor a podcast, then drop us a note. Just pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com and get in contact. So, Mr. Stay, have a fantastic week. Can't wait. This build up to Christmas. We're going to have Christmas special coming up. And also talking about, folks, little preview of goals for next year as well. If you're interested in kind of getting something under your belt before you start next year, listen out, because we've got some great shows coming up over the next few weeks. Really so it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And a goodbye from Mark 2.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.